Oregon football has had many fun running backs over the last decade. Guys such as LaMichael James, Kenjon Barner, Royce Freeman, and more recently CJ Verdell have all been fantastic players and superstars for this Ducks program. Every year there are multiple 5-star running backs, and each one of them is expected to change their program and live up to all that potential and hype they have. The subject of today's video is no different. He was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, had one of the best high school performances in high school football history, and was seen as the future of Oregon football, but unfortunately, he did not end up living up to the hype, and his football career came to an early end. Today we're going to talk about who he is, go through his journey, and what ultimately happened to him. So, without further ado, let's get into today's video. So you're probably wondering who the subject of today's video is, and it is none other than former Oregon and Oregon State running back Thomas Tyner. That name may ring a bell, but in order to understand who he is, we first need to go back in time. Tyner grew up in the city of Aloha, which is not in Hawaii, but in fact near Portland, Oregon. His brother played sports and later went on to play for Pacific University, but Thomas would become a much bigger deal than him. He was insanely productive. As a sophomore, he ran for nearly 2,000 yards and 19 touchdowns, becoming the first sophomore in Oregon high school football history to win Player of the Year. As a junior, he ran for 1,100 yards. In his senior year, he rushed for 3,415 yards. That is absolutely incredible, but it gets crazier. In one game, he ran for 643 yards and 10 touchdowns. I don't even have words to describe that, and you'd have to put the sliders all the way up on NCAA Football 14 and make the quarters extremely long to run for that kind of yardage. But somehow he did, and he was the best player and best recruit in the state of Oregon that year, and now he'd have to figure out where he'd want to go to school. One reporter said, quote, "If he lived in the South, every major school in the SEC would be drooling over him." They were right, as it seemed his Final Five was all Pac-12 schools, but he eventually would decide to stay on the West Coast and commit to Oregon. He picked the Ducks early in the process over USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon State. He would later make things interesting as he would decommit from the Ducks, but within 48 hours, he recommitted to the team, and this would be final. He said, quote, "This is home, and this is where I want to play my college football." That never changed. "I just thought I should take some other visits and be 100% certain about it. But after some thinking, I know this is where I want to be. I want to be a Duck." He was reportedly going to visit UCLA, but it seems his mind was made up. At the time, he committed to head coach Chip Kelly, but he would later leave, and Mark Helfrich was now the coach. He was a star, and some fans thought he would take over as a freshman. He was a motivated star in every department, and 24/7 Sports agreed. He was a 5-star prospect, the #1 running back, and the 20th best player in the class of 2013. Ducks fans thought of him as a savior, but his Oregon career did not go as planned. He would come into Oregon with immense hype, and he also joined fellow 4-star running back Dontre Wilson, who is now in the NFL, and Tyner would have an opportunity to play right away. In 2013, he would start out the season on the road against Virginia, and he'd end up having 51 yards with 2 touchdowns. The following week against Tennessee, he added one more score, and against Cal, he had 94 yards in the score. He'd also helped them beat Colorado and number 16 Washington, and now the Ducks were 5-0, and he already had 4 touchdowns to his name. He'd start to get even more hype, as against Washington State, he went for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then had a score in a win over number 12 UCLA. It seemed that Tyner was living up to the hype and was going to be the next big thing, but then he started to slow down. In his next 3 games, he didn't even have over 60 yards and failed to score a touchdown, but he would save his best for last, it seemed. In the Civil War game against Oregon State, Marcus Mariota and the Ducks would have a comeback, and Tyner would help as well, as he had 140 yards and 1 touchdown and showcased all the potential in the world. He then helped the Ducks get to the Alamo Bowl, where they'd beat the Longhorns 30-7, and he'd have 22 yards. To finish his freshman year, he ran the ball 115 times for 711 yards and 9 touchdowns. He was seen as one of the best freshman running backs in the country, and the sky was seemingly the limit for him. 2014 would get off to a slower start, as in week 2, he would have a touchdown in their win over number 7 Michigan State, but then he really started to slow down. He was also battling a foot injury at the time, but his best game of the year would come against Stanford, as he had 63 yards and 2 scores in that one. The Ducks would play well enough to get to the college football playoff, as their only loss in the regular season was to Arizona by 1 possession. They ended up getting selected to play against Florida State in the first round, and the number 3 Seminoles were no match for this team. Tyner would also have the best game of his career. He ran for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns, as the Ducks won 59-20, and this was an embarrassment to Jameis Winston and Jimbo Fisher. Helfrich had the Ducks in the national title game, and in that match against number 4 Ohio State, Tyner would have 62 yards, but it wasn't enough as they lost 42-20. Through 2 years, Tyner was a very productive back, and if he could have one more great year in 2015, he'd be off to the NFL. Except now he'd have competition, as 5-star running back Royce Freeman had now come into the mix, and he'd have to be playing his best football. He'd end up not getting a single opportunity, as before the season even started, he had injured his shoulder and decided to get surgery. This would hold him out for the entire 2015 season, and eventually it would lead to him retiring from football. This was extremely difficult, as combining the expectations with that injury made Thomas's mental health go down the drain. He said, quote, "It was very tough for me because here I am, this top running back recruit who comes into Oregon, and I don't think I was meeting those expectations. And then I have another big setback on my play, and that was definitely harder for me mentally than physically. I think I felt like I let a lot of people down." In 2 years, Tyner finished with 1,284 yards and 14 rushing touchdowns, but his career wasn't over just yet. He eventually decided to come out of retirement and committed to their rival Oregon State, saying, quote, "I've wanted to be a Beaver my whole life." This is extremely ironic because if he wanted to be a Beaver his whole life, he could have easily committed there out of high school, but maybe it was because of the state of the Beavers program. I don't know. But it probably did ruffle the feathers of Ducks fans, but this was his only chance at a comeback. Before we talk about Oregon State though, going back to 2014, he had found a new passion, the outdoors. He said, quote, "It was nice to get out and not have to deal with all the voices and really invest in how much I love being outside. This becomes extremely important." He came into Oregon State a little bit out of shape, as he said, quote, "I came in with a little bit of fishing weight, but getting back into shape is the biggest thing for me right now." He would eventually readjust to the game and form a bond with Oregon State's main running back, Ryan Nall. Tyner's chance to save his career did not go well. His best game of the season came in a loss to number 6 Washington, as he ran for 54 yards and 1 touchdown. He also scored against both California and Stanford, but it was an abysmal year for both him and the Oregon State program. The Beavers went 1-11, saw their coach quit halfway through the year, and Tyner could never really get anything going. He finished with 297 yards and 3 touchdowns, and that was it for his football career. His NFL hopes were basically out the window at this point, but honestly, he didn't have a regret. He said, quote, "I felt like I didn't want to live with what ifs. I felt there was a what if with football, and I did not want to go out the way I did by medically retiring, so I feel like I owed it to myself." That is why he joined Oregon State, but honestly, the NFL never ended up happening for him because his heart was never in the game at that point. His football career was over, but it didn't seem to bother him at all. He said, quote, "I'm excited more than anything. It's a new life for me. I get to be me. People want to see and know the football side of me, but now that I'm not playing football, I'm going to enjoy myself a lot more and do what I love." While a lot of people would call Thomas Tyner a bust, I would actually say the opposite. He had a pretty good career, had some great moments for Oregon, and when he did play, was good, so I wouldn't even call him a bust on the field. Secondly, he's actually happy with his life. It seems that all the outside noise really got to him, and his heart was never really in the game. He just seemingly wanted to be outside, keep a small circle, and do his own thing. So props to him for just doing that. A lot of times in life, we all get too caught up worrying about what everyone else thinks and what everyone else's judgments on our actions will be. Tyner's a guy who enjoyed his football ride, but was ready for the next stage of life, and in my eyes, he's a true winner. While his football career didn't work out as many expected, I remember having a lot of fun watching him his freshman year, and it's been awesome getting to know his story. What do you guys think though? What do you think went wrong with Thomas Tyner? Who's another guy I could touch on in my next video? And what are your expectations for Oregon football this fall? Let me know down below. Smash that like button if you want to support today's video. Subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.